This is lesson 11B. We are going to be multiplying decimals. Please open up your workbook to page 11 and open up your notebook to the next clean page. Remember, in your notebook, you should start by dating the top of the page. So it's 9/ whatever today's date is in September. And this is lesson 11B. Remember, I explained yesterday that we are going to split up a lot of these lessons into two parts. Yesterday, we were adding and subtracting decimals. Today, we're going to be multiplying decimals. So let's start by looking at example number 3 in our workbook. It says, what is the area of this antique map? Use the formula area equals length times width to find the area of the map. So we've learned about area and perimeter. Perimeter would be the distance around the map, right? It's when we think perimeter, it's like a fence. When we think area, we think about the space inside. So today we are finding the area. We are finding the space inside this map. When I think area, I think if I'm like going to put a carpet down in a room. If I want to find out how much carpet I'm going to need in a room, I'm finding the area of that room, how much space is inside of it. So they were asking us to find the area of the map. It's how much space is inside that map. So they gave us the dimensions of the map here, right? We have 3 and 25/100 feet and 2.5 feet. We have the length and we have the width. So they gave us two dimensions that are going to help us to find the area. So in our notebook, let's write, this is example 3. And we have to start by using the area formula that they gave us. Area equals length times width. Okay, so now I'm going to plug in the numbers that I know into this formula. I don't know what the area is, so I'm going to keep that as a capital A. Area equals, well, what's the length? Oh, I labeled my length as 3.25. So I'll have 3.25 times, what's the width? Oh, I labeled the width on the picture, 2.5, 2.5. So now I have a multiplication with decimals problem, and I have to write these numbers vertically to solve my multiplication problem. So when we were adding and subtracting decimals, the key was to line the decimals up. Today we're multiplying decimals. We do not have to line the decimals up. So I'm just going to rewrite my multiplication problem vertically, and you should also be writing this in your notebook. 3.25 times 2.5. So now the key to doing these multiplication with decimals problems is to move the decimal out of the equation. So I want to move the decimal out of this multiplication problem. That way it's like I'm just multiplying 325 times 25. So let's see how we would do that. We need to move the decimal so that it's at the end of the number. So in 3.25, I would move my decimal point once, twice to the right. So now I want you to write a 2 on the side and circle it. And now in 2.5, I have to move my decimal point once to the right. Write it in the circle, write it on the right, and circle it. So that means if in my first number I have to move the decimal twice, and in my second number I have to move the decimal point once. Now I want to add those two numbers up. 2 plus 1 is 3. And I'm writing it down here underneath because in my final answer, I will have to remember to move my decimal point 3 times back into the problem, 3 times to the left. So now we moved our decimal point all the way out of the problem. It's like we have these whole numbers to be multiplying. So now we're going to be multiplying 325 times 25. So I start with that 5 in the 25, and I'm going to multiply that times every number up top. So first I have 5 times 5. Well, 5 times 5 is 25. Write down the 5, carry the 2. Remember, if I'm doing this on the board, you should be doing this in your notebook. Now I take that 5 again. I have 5 times 2 is 10, plus the number up top is 12. Write down the 2, carry the 1. Next, I have 5 times 3 because I'm multiplying that 5 times everything up top. 5 times 3 is 15, plus 1 is 16. That's the end of multiplying that 5, so I'm just going to write the 16. So now I took care of that 5, the 5 that was in the ones place. Now I'm going to be multiplying times the 2 in the tens place. Well, a 2 in the tens place is really like I'm saying, oh, we're multiplying times 20. So I have to start my second row of multiplication down here with a 0 because I'm multiplying it times 2 tens or like 20. So I start with a 0. So now I'm just going to cross out this 2 and the 1 so I remember that I used it the first round of multiplication. So now I multiply the 2 times everything up top, starting with 2 times 5. 2 times 5 is 10. Write down the 0, carry the 1. 2 times 2 is 4. Plus 1, 5. I have nothing to carry. Notice how in my answer I'm lining up my place values nice and neatly. I'm lining up the numbers because I'm thinking ahead, and my next step is going to be to add. Now I have 2 times 3 is 6. Write it down. So I multiplied that 2 times everything up top. My next step with multiplying is to add. So I add 5 plus 0, 5. 2 plus 0, 2. 6 plus 5, 11. Carry the 1. 6 plus 1 plus 1 is 8. So I get 8, 1, 2, 5. But I'm not done yet because I have to move my decimal point 3 times back into this problem. So that means from the end of this number, I'm going to move my decimal point once, twice, 3 times. And my final answer is 8.125. And that checks with the answer on the page. Okay, now let's do another question together. Let's look at number 17. So in your notebook, I want you to write number 17. We have 5.3 times 2.7. Now, it's just a coincidence here that the decimal points line up. Remember, with multiplying decimals, the decimal points do not have to line up because our key here is going to be to move the decimal point out of the problem like we are multiplying whole numbers. So in 5.3, I want to move that decimal point so that it's all the way to the right of the number. How many times will I move the decimal point? I will have to move the decimal point once to the right. So I'm going to write a 1 and circle it. Now in 2.7, how many times will I move that decimal point? I will have to move that decimal point also once to the right. So I'm writing a 1 and circling it. So now I'm going to add those two numbers in the circles up, and that will tell me how many times I will have to move the decimal point back into the answer to the left. So how many times will I have to move my decimal point in my answer? I will move my decimal point. 1 plus 1 is 2. So write that number 2 and circle it. That way you remember to move your decimal point in your answer. So now I'm going to multiply. It's like I'm saying 53 times 27 because I moved the decimals out of the problem. So now I always start with that bottom number on the right. 7 times 3. 7 times 3 is 21. Write down the 1, carry the 2. Next, 7 times 5. 7 times 5 is 35 plus 2, 37. Okay, I'm finished with that 7. So now it's like I'm really multiplying times 20. So that means I'm going to start my second row down here with a 0. So now multiplying that 2 times everything up top. 2 times 3 is 6. 2 times 5 is 10. Now, what is my next step here? What operation do I have to do with the 371 and the 1060? I am going to add 1 plus 0, 1. 7 plus 6, 13. Write down the 3, carry the 1. 3 plus 1 plus 0 is 4. Bring 1 plus nothing is a 1. So now I have 1,431, but I can't forget about the 2 over here. So my decimal points at the end of my number, I'm going to move it back into the problem twice. 2 times to the left back in, and that means my final answer is 14 and 31 hundredths. We are going to do one more question for homework, and then I'll see you in class tomorrow to do more practice. So the last question we're going to do for homework is number 18. So we have 8 times 4.09. Now, you might remember that with multiplication, we can change the order. So we can have 8 times 4.09 or 4.09 times 8. I normally like to have if there is a number that has less digits, I personally like to put that number on the bottom. So now I have 4.09 times 8. Okay, so that first number, how many times will we have to move the decimal point? We will have to move the decimal point twice to the right. So write it to the right and circle it. Now in 8 is already a whole number. We don't have to move the decimal point there at all. Our goal is to have the decimal point all the way to the right of the number so that it's a whole number. 8 already has a decimal point at the end of the number, so there's nothing to move there. So that's a 0. So how many times will I have to move the decimal point in my answer? I will have to move the decimal point 2 times in my answer. So now I want you to do your multiplication here. What is 409 times 8? Actually, what's your final answer here? Let's see. You do your multiplication. Remember to move your decimal. What is the final answer to this problem? So when I multiply, I get 8 times 9 is 72. Write down the 2, carry the 7. 8 times 0 is 0, plus 7 is 7. 8 times 4, 32. Last step, move the decimal point back into the problem. My answer is 32.72.